5 years ago, my sister Sophie stole my fiancé. Today, at our father's funeral, she showed up draped in emeralds, laughing beside the man who broke my heart. But when I said, "Meet my husband," she froze. Before we begin, if stories of quiet strength and second chances speak to you, I invite you to subscribe. Let me take you back to where it all began, back when I still believed in fairy tales. My name is Emma, and 5 years ago, I thought I had everything. I was engaged to James Morrison, heir to the Morrison textile fortune. We were the golden couple of our county, young, in love, planning a future that sparkled like the ring on my finger. I remember that September afternoon in Ashworth Gardens like it was yesterday. The park where James first told me he loved me, where we spent hours dreaming about our wedding, our life together. The ancient oak trees stretched toward a pewter sky and fallen leaves carpeted the ground in gold and crimson. James sat beside me on our favorite bench, his dark eyes warm as he traced circles on my gloved hand. "June is too rainy for a wedding," I said, making a face. "Can you imagine our guests huddling under umbrellas?" James laughed, the sound I'd fallen in love with. "What about May, then? Perfect weather, and we could have the reception at Thornfield Manor. The estate with the stone walls covered in roses." My eyes lit up. Picture it. Crystal chandeliers, everyone dancing until dawn. He pulled me closer. "I don't care where we get married, Emma. As long as you're there, nothing else matters. You're all I need." Those words echoed in my mind for years afterward, because 3 weeks later, James Morrison disappeared from my life without a trace. No goodbye, no explanation, no returned letters, just gone. I stood at his estate gates until my feet went numb, staring at shuttered windows that had once been warm with welcome. The silence was deafening. My friends whispered behind their fans. My mother wrung her hands and asked what I'd done wrong, but I hadn't done anything wrong. The truth was so much worse, but that wasn't the last time she tried to take something from me. The truth walked into view on a crisp October afternoon in the heart of town. I was buying ribbons for a bonnet I'd never wear, trying to pretend my life hadn't shattered, when I saw them. James, walking arm in arm with someone whose laugh I recognized better than my own. My sister Sophie. Sophie, 4 years older, devastatingly beautiful, and the master of getting everything she'd ever wanted. They moved through the crowd like they owned the world, completely absorbed in each other. James was saying something that made Sophie throw back her head and laugh, her golden hair catching the sunlight. The sight hit me like a physical blow. My vision narrowed to just them, my former fiancé and my own sister, together as if I'd never existed. That's when James spotted me. His laughter died instantly, guilt flashing across his face like lightning. He opened his mouth, probably to offer some pathetic explanation, but Sophie's grip tightened on his arm. Her jade green eyes locked onto mine with pure, undiluted triumph. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her look said everything. "He's mine now. You lost." Here's what I learned about betrayal that day. It doesn't just break your heart, it shatters your entire understanding of the world. The sister who braided your hair, who shared midnight secrets, who promised to be your maid of honor. She'd been planning this all along. Sophie had always been jealous of me, though I'd been too naive to see it. While I made friends easily and laughed without fear, Sophie had to calculate every social interaction. She watched me charm our parents' guests while she stood in the shadows. Beautiful, but somehow always overlooked. The signs had been there for years. The way she'd accidentally spilled tea on my favorite dress before important parties. How she'd mention my failures to potential suitors while highlighting my youthful inexperience. The books that would mysteriously disappear from my room. Always the ones young men had recommended to me. I dismissed it all as sisterly teasing. Sophie was older, more sophisticated. Surely she didn't see me as competition. How wrong I was. When I announced my engagement to James, something shifted in her. James wasn't just any man. He was wealth, status, everything Sophie craved. His textile empire was making him one of the richest men in the county. People whispered he'd be knighted before 40. So Sophie went to work with the precision of a master strategist. She started appearing everywhere James went. Coffee visits to his office, lingering after social gatherings, asking thoughtful questions about his business. But it was more calculated than I ever imagined. Sophie had done her research. She knew James's weaknesses, his insecurities about being taken seriously in business circles dominated by older men. She knew he craved intellectual conversation about industry trends, political developments, the kind of sophisticated discourse he felt I couldn't provide. She painted herself as the mature sister, the one who understood his ambitions. Where I offered affection and encouragement, Sophie offered analysis and strategy. Where I listened to his dreams, Sophie helped him refine his plans. "Emma's so lucky to have you," she'd purr, her smile warm while her eyes calculated. Not every woman can appreciate a man with such vision. Most girls our age are still thinking about ribbons and dances. The implication was clear. I was still a girl while she was a woman, and James fell for it completely. He mistook her manipulation for wisdom, her flattery for sincere admiration. She whispered doubts about me, too young, too naive, too inexperienced for his sophisticated world. Wouldn't he be happier with someone who could be a true partner in his ambitions? Meanwhile, I remained blissfully unaware, planning our wedding and dreaming of our future. Every time James seemed distant or distracted, Sophie would appear with a reasonable explanation. "He's under such pressure with the business expansion, Emma. You mustn't take it personally." She was covering her tracks while digging my grave, and James, flattered and foolish, chose her. What she didn't expect was what came next. The betrayal destroyed me, but I refused to let it define me. 3 months after seeing them together, I made a choice that shocked everyone who knew me. I packed my life into 2 trunks and bought a train ticket to Edinburgh, hundreds of miles from everything I'd ever known. My mother wept. My friends begged me to stay and fight for James. "Don't let her win," they pleaded. But I wasn't running away. I was running towards something better. Edinburgh welcomed me with ancient hills and shimmering locks, cobblestone streets that had witnessed centuries of human drama. The city had a dignity that felt healing after the petty cruelties of home. I found lodging in a modest boarding house and work at the Royal Hospital, one of Scotland's most respected medical institutions. The early days were brutal. Sleepless nights haunted by memories of James's laugh and Sophie's victorious smile. I questioned everything. Was I a coward for leaving? Had I given up too easily? But the hospital became my salvation. The wards were filled with people fighting battles that made my heartbreak seem small. Mrs. MacLeod, a seamstress with 7 children, facing surgery with courage I could barely fathom. Young Tommy, an orphan with a broken leg who still smiled every morning. These people taught me what real strength looked like. I threw myself into nursing with desperate intensity, studying medical texts by candlelight until my eyes burned, attending university lectures where professors barely acknowledged women existed, where male students whispered cruel jokes about playing nurse. I endured it all because I had found my purpose. The work was backbreaking, 12-hour shifts cleaning wounds, changing dressings, holding the hands of people who had no one else. But every life I helped save felt like proof that I mattered, that I wasn't just the girl whose sister stole her fiancé. Slowly, painfully, I rebuilt myself. Not the girl who'd trusted blindly, but a woman who understood her own strength. I learned to set broken bones, to recognize the signs of infection, to comfort families receiving devastating news. Each skill I mastered was armor against the past. Within 2 years, I was one of Edinburgh's most respected nurses. But I didn't stop there. I organized charity drives, raising funds for medical equipment. I read to orphaned children every Sunday, their eager faces lighting up at stories of brave princesses who saved themselves. I volunteered at poorhouses, finding comfort in serving those who had even less than I'd started with. Each act of service was my rebellion against the bitterness Sophie had tried to plant in my heart. She'd wanted to destroy me, but I refused to let her win. Instead, I built something beautiful from the ashes she'd left behind. That's when I met him. The man who would change everything. The moment that would make my sister's diamond smile shattered. So Dr. Alexander Thornton entered my life at a medical symposium on surgical innovations. When he walked into that lecture hall, conversations stopped. Not because of his looks, though he was handsome in a distinguished way, silver threading through dark hair, but because of his presence. At 48, he commanded respect without demanding it. Alexander was more than Edinburgh's most celebrated physician. He was a legend whose name was spoken with reverence in medical circles across Europe. His innovations in surgical techniques had revolutionized medicine. His research on infection prevention had saved thousands of lives. His philanthropy had built hospitals and medical colleges across Scotland, providing care to those who could never afford it otherwise. When important people spoke of medical advancement, they spoke of Alexander Thornton. When medical students dreamed of greatness, they dreamed of following in his footsteps. When other doctors faced impossible cases, they wrote to Alexander for advice. But wealth and fame hadn't made him arrogant. If anything, success had made him kinder. He remembered what it felt like to struggle, to doubt, to face impossible odds. That's why he noticed a young nurse giving a presentation on patient care with passion that lit up the room. But what struck me most was his kindness. After my presentation on patient care, he approached with genuine warmth that had nothing to do with politeness and everything to do with recognizing a kindred spirit. "You have a rare gift, Miss Harper," he said, his voice cultured but not condescending. "Not just for healing, but for giving people hope. That combination is what medicine truly needs." He didn't talk down to me or dismiss my ideas because I was a woman in a man's profession. He listened, really listened, asked thoughtful questions about my work, my observations, my dreams for improving patient care. That conversation changed everything. Our courtship was nothing like the giddy romance I'd shared with James. This was deeper, built on mutual respect, shared values, endless conversations that stretched from sunset to sunrise. We debated medical ethics over coffee, discussed literature during long walks through Edinburgh's gardens, shared dreams of building a world where healing wasn't a privilege for the wealthy. Alexander listened to my ideas about improving hospital sanitation and didn't just nod politely, he implemented them. When I suggested training programs for women in nursing, he helped me write the proposals. When I worried about patients who couldn't afford treatment, he quietly established a fund to cover their care. This wasn't a man trying to impress me or change me to fit his vision. This was a partnership of equals who made each other better. We courted for 18 months, taking time to build something real. Alexander introduced me to his colleagues as a fellow professional, not as the charming young woman I'm seeing. He supported my work without trying to overshadow it, encouraged my ambitions without trying to redirect them toward more suitable pursuits. When he proposed by moonlight beside Loch Katrina, his words were simple and profound. "I've spent my life building things, hospitals, research, dreams. But with you, I want to build a life. A real partnership where we make each other stronger, where we create something together that neither of us could achieve alone." I said yes without hesitation. This wasn't the breathless infatuation I'd felt for James. This was something deeper, steadier, more real. Love built on genuine understanding and shared purpose. Our wedding was intimate and perfect, held in a stone chapel surrounded by Highland heather. Alexander's colleagues came, as did the nurses I worked with, the orphan children I read to, even some of the poorhouse families I'd helped. It wasn't about impressing society. It was about celebrating with people who mattered. No society pages covered our wedding. No gossip columns speculated about my dress or the guest list. We chose substance over spectacle, meaning over appearances. For 3 blissful years, I lived in that happiness. Our life together was everything I'd never dared to dream. We worked side by side on research projects that changed how hospitals treated infections. We traveled to medical conferences across Europe where I presented papers that challenged conventional wisdom about patient care. Alexander never introduced me as his wife first. I was always Dr. Emma Thornton, the nurse researcher whose work on surgical sanitation has revolutionized hospital care. He made sure my contributions were recognized, my voice was heard, my expertise was respected. We built a home filled with medical journals and poetry books, comfortable chairs by the fireplace where we'd debate the day's cases, a garden where Alexander grew herbs for his experiments while I tended roses just because they were beautiful. Our dinner parties weren't social obligations, but gatherings of fascinating minds, doctors, researchers, reformers working to make medicine more humane. Conversations that mattered, friendships built on shared purpose rather than social climbing. I established the first formal nursing training program in Edinburgh with Alexander's full support and funding. Young women came from across Scotland to learn not just medical skills, but how to advocate for their patients, how to challenge doctors when necessary, how to be healers rather than just assistants. The program became my legacy, my way of ensuring other women would have the opportunities and respect I'd had to fight for. We taught them to read medical texts, to understand anatomy, to recognize symptoms that doctors might miss. We trained them to speak up when they disagreed with treatment plans, to be partners in healing rather than silent servants. Some of the young women reminded me of myself at their age, eager, idealistic, determined to make a difference. Others came from backgrounds of poverty and hardship, seeing nursing as their path to independence and respectability. All of them inspired me with their courage and dedication. "You're changing the world," Alexander would tell me as he watched me work with the students, one nurse at a time, one patient at a time. And maybe I was. The girl who'd been broken by betrayal was now a woman who helped heal others, who built institutions, who mattered in ways that had nothing to do with whose name she carried or whose arm she held at social gatherings. But sometimes in quiet moments, I wondered if I was running from something or towards something. Had I truly healed from Sophie's betrayal, or had I simply built such a meaningful life that the pain couldn't reach me anymore? I was about to find out. I rarely thought about home anymore, about Sophie or James or the life I'd left behind. Why would I? I was too busy building something meaningful, until the telegram arrived that would force me to face my past one final time. "Father died suddenly. Funeral Tuesday. Please come. Mother." 17 words that dragged me back to a world I'd tried to forget. I found the telegram on our hall table when I returned from the hospital, still wearing my nurse's apron, my hands smelling of carbolic soap. Alexander found me in our garden 20 minutes later, sitting on the stone bench where we'd shared our first kiss, the crumpled paper clutched in my trembling hands. Without a word, he wrapped his arms around me as grief crashed over me in waves. Not just grief for my father's death, but for all the lost years between us. The letters I'd never sent, the visits I'd avoided out of pride and pain, the reconciliation that would now never come. My father. Thomas Harper, the quiet librarian who taught me to love Wordsworth and Keats, who'd believed poetry could heal wounded hearts. He'd been the one to bandage my scraped knees as a child, to listen patiently to my adolescent dramas, to encourage my dreams even when they seemed impossible for a woman. We hadn't spoken in 3 years. My own stubborn pride and lingering pain had kept us apart. I told myself there would be time later, when the hurt had faded more, when I felt stronger. Now there would never be another chance to tell him how much his quiet wisdom had shaped who I'd become. "I have to go back," I whispered against Alexander's shoulder, my voice breaking on the words. "Then we'll go together," he said simply, his arms tightening around me. "You don't face this alone. You'll never face anything alone again." The journey home felt like traveling backward through time, each mile taking me further from the woman I'd become and closer to the girl I'd been. As our train crossed into my home county, memories flooded back with devastating clarity. The gardens where James and I had planned our future. The drawing rooms where Sophie and I had once shared secrets and dreams. The streets that held both joy and devastation, love and betrayal. I'd left as a broken girl, fleeing in shame and heartbreak. I was returning as a woman who'd found her strength, her purpose, her worth. But would that be enough to face the people who'd nearly destroyed me? I had no idea what awaited me in the place I'd once called home. She thought she'd won everything. She had no idea what she was about to lose. The funeral was held in St. Mary's, the same parish church where I'd once imagined walking down the aisle in white silk. Now I walked down that aisle in black morning dress, Alexander's steady presence beside me. The church was packed. Faces from my past turned to stare as we entered. Some with curiosity, others with barely concealed gossip hunger. What had become of Emma Harper, the girl who'd fled after her sister stole her fiancé? I kept my chin high and my expression serene. Let them wonder, the service was beautiful. Father Thomas was remembered as he deserved, a gentle man who'd touched many lives through his quiet kindness. I wept for him, for the years we'd lost, for the words left unspoken. Then, as the final hymn began, she made her entrance. Sophie had always known how to command a room, and even a funeral was no exception. She swept through the church doors with James at her side, dressed in elegant black that somehow managed to look fashionable rather than respectful. Emeralds glittered at her throat and wrists, a fortune in jewels that caught every eye. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd gotten everything she wanted. James looked diminished. The vibrant man I'd once loved had been replaced by someone hollow-eyed and tired, worn down by years of chasing Sophie's expensive tastes. But Sophie looked triumphant. After the service, as mourners gathered in the churchyard, Sophie approached me like a predator who'd spotted wounded prey. Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Emma," she purred, her voice carrying just enough to ensure others could hear. "How unexpected to see you here, though I suppose even you couldn't stay away from family duty forever." She looked me up and down with theatrical concern, her performance clearly intended for the watching crowd. This wasn't just about humiliating me, it was about reasserting her dominance in front of everyone who'd known us as children. "Look at you," she continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Still wearing those simple dresses, still playing the martyr. Some things never change, do they?" But I could see something desperate in her eyes, something that hadn't been there 5 years ago. The confident, triumphant woman who'd stolen my fiancé had been replaced by someone who seemed to need constant validation of her victory. Poor thing, still unwed after all these years. She pressed closer to James, her hand possessive on his arm. "Well, I have everything a woman could want. James gives me jewels, travels, a life of luxury, more than you could ever have imagined." She gestured to her emeralds, her silk dress, her carefully arranged hair. But there was something frantic about the display, as if she were trying to convince herself as much as everyone else. "Tell them about Paris, darling," she prompted James, "about the opera house, the private boxes." James looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting between Sophie and me. The years hadn't been kind to him. Where once he'd been vibrant and confident, now he seemed worn down, tired in a way that expensive clothes couldn't hide. "Sophie," he said quietly, "perhaps this isn't the time." "Nonsense," she interrupted, her laugh too bright, too loud. "Emma should know how well we've done, how happy we are." But her desperation was showing, and I realized something that shocked me. Sophie was afraid that seeing me again, seeing what I'd become, would somehow diminish what she'd built. The words were designed to wound, to reopen old scars in front of an audience. Around us, conversations quieted as people leaned in to witness the drama. 5 years ago, those words might have destroyed me. The girl who'd fled this place might have crumbled under the weight of public humiliation. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I met Sophie's gaze with calm composure, my voice steady and clear. "Sophie, I'm genuinely glad you found what you were looking for, but I've learned that happiness isn't measured in emeralds or social status." I paused, letting silence stretch just long enough to build tension. The watching crowd held its breath. "Allow me to introduce my husband." Sophie's smug expression faltered slightly. She looked around, probably expecting to see some country doctor or local merchant, someone she could dismiss with a cutting remark. That's when Alexander stepped forward. The effect was instantaneous and electric. Conversations didn't just quiet, they stopped completely. Alexander Thornton was a name everyone in the county knew, even if they'd never seen him in person. His reputation preceded him like a royal announcement. He was tall and distinguished, his silver-streaked hair and perfectly tailored coat marking him as a man of substance. But it was his natural authority that commanded the churchyard's attention. This wasn't someone trying to impress. This was someone who didn't need to. I watched Sophie's face transform as recognition dawned. The color drained from her cheeks so quickly I thought she might faint. Her carefully constructed confidence crumbled like ancient parchment. "Dr. Alexander Thornton," someone whispered in the crowd. "The Dr. Thornton." Whispers rippled through the crowd like wildfire. "Is that Dr. Alexander Thornton? The Alexander Thornton? The one who built half the hospitals in Scotland? Didn't he refuse the Queen's offer of knighthood last year? He's worth more than the Morrison textile fortune, isn't he? I heard he turned down a partnership with Morrison Mills 3 years ago." That last comment hit James like a physical blow. His already pale face went ashen as he realized the implications. Not only had Alexander refused to save his failing business, but he'd married the woman James had thrown away for Sophie. Sophie's emeralds suddenly looked garish rather than elegant. Her expensive dress seemed overdone beside my simple morning gown. Everything she'd built her identity on, wealth, status, the prize she'd stolen, crumbled in the face of what I'd actually built for myself. I had no idea," Sophie whispered, her voice tiny for the first time in her life. Alexander approached with unhurried dignity, his arm slipping around my waist with a tenderness that spoke of deep, abiding love. "I'm so sorry for your loss, darling," he murmured, his voice a soft anchor in the storm of emotions. Then he turned to Sophie and James with impeccable courtesy. My condolences on your father-in-law's passing. Thomas was a remarkable man. His work preserving the county's historical records will benefit generations. The fact that Alexander knew and respected my father, had taken time to understand his contributions, wasn't lost on anyone present, least of all Sophie. James managed to stammer, "Dr. Thornton, thank you for coming." "Of course," Alexander replied graciously. "Emma speaks of her family often. I'm only sorry we're meeting under such sad circumstances." The moment when everything Sophie thought she knew about winning crumbled. What happened next was beautiful in its quiet devastation. Sophie tried to recover her composure, but her mask was slipping. "Dr. Thornton," she said, forcing brightness into her voice. "What a surprise. I had no idea you knew our little Emma." "Little Emma?" Alexander's eyebrows rose slightly and there was steel beneath his polite tone. "I'm afraid you're mistaken. My wife is one of Scotland's most respected nurses and medical researchers. Her work on surgical sanitation has saved countless lives. There's nothing little about her impact on the world." The word wife hit Sophie like a physical blow. Around us, the whispers grew louder. "Wife? Emma Harper married Dr. Thornton? When did this happen? She's been living in Edinburgh all this time. A nurse? Emma became a nurse?" James looked like he might be sick. He was staring at me with something that might have been regret, finally understanding what he'd thrown away. The sweet, naive girl he'd discarded had grown into a woman who moved in circles he could never reach. Sophie's emerald suddenly seemed gaudy rather than elegant. Her expensive dress looked overdone beside my simple black morning gown. Everything she'd built her identity on, wealth, status, the prize she'd stolen, crumbled in the face of what I'd built for myself. I had no idea," Sophie whispered, her voice tiny for the first time in her life. "Why would you?" I replied gently. "We lost touch years ago. I've been rather busy building a life." The crowd was eating up every word. This was the gossip of the decade. The girl who'd fled in disgrace had returned married to one of the most eligible men in Scotland. The sister who'd played the victor was suddenly publicly revealed as the fool. But I felt no triumph, only a deep, abiding peace. Alexander and I paid our respects at my father's graveside, where I whispered promises to live a life that would make him proud. The tears I shed were cleansing, grief mixed with gratitude for the path that had led me to this moment. When we prepared to leave, Sophie approached one final time. Her arrogance was completely gone, replaced by something that looked almost like panic. "Emma," she said quietly, about what happened before." I turned to face her fully, my voice gentle but firm. "Sophie, what happened between us led me exactly where I needed to be. I don't carry anger anymore. I hope you find genuine happiness. Not the kind that depends on having more than someone else, but the kind that comes from being truly content with your own life." James stepped forward hesitantly. "Emma, I need you to know. I realize now that what I did was in the past," I interrupted kindly. "Don't let it define your future, James." As Alexander and I walked toward our carriage, I heard Sophie's voice behind us, barely a whisper. How did she win?" But she was asking the wrong question. This wasn't about winning or losing. It was about choosing to build rather than destroy, to heal rather than harm, to become the person you're meant to be rather than trying to tear down someone else. The carriage ride to the station was quiet, Alexander's hand warm in mine as we watched my childhood county roll past for what might be the last time. "Are you all right?" he asked as Edinburgh's skyline came into view. I considered the question seriously. Was I all right? I'd faced the people who'd broken my heart, stood in the shadow of old pain, and emerged whole. "Yes," I said, meaning it completely. "I feel like I can finally let go." Back in Edinburgh, I threw myself into my work with renewed passion. The confrontation with my past had freed something in me, a final release from the girl who'd defined herself by what others thought of her. Alexandra and I continued building our life together. We established a fund for training women in nursing. We traveled to medical conferences where I presented research that changed how hospitals treated patients. We created something meaningful and lasting. Months later, news trickled back from home. James's textile business had finally collapsed completely, taking with it the fortune Sophie had married him for. They'd divorced quietly, Sophie disappearing from the county in the dark of night to avoid her creditors. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall. If anything, I hoped they'd both learn what I had. That real happiness couldn't be stolen from someone else. It had to be built from within. 2 years later, I stood on the balcony of our Edinburgh home, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of fire and gold. Alexander joined me, slipping his arms around my waist as we looked out over the city we'd made our own. "Any regrets?" he asked softly, a question that had become our evening ritual. "None," I replied, and meant it with every fiber of my being. My victory hadn't been in marrying a man wealthier than James or more respected than anyone Sophie could catch. My victory was quieter and more profound than that. I'd learned that betrayal, devastating as it feels, can be a gift in disguise. It strips away illusions and forces you to discover who you really are underneath all the roles you play for others. Sophie thought she'd won by stealing my fiancé, but she'd actually freed me to become someone I never could have been as James Morrison's wife. A woman who saved lives, who built institutions, who mattered in ways that had nothing to do with whose arm I hung on at social gatherings. And the girl who'd fled home in heartbreak had been replaced by a woman who'd found her calling, her love, and her peace. A woman whose quiet triumph was simply a life well lived. That night, as Edinburgh settled into comfortable darkness around us, I realized something profound. The best revenge isn't getting even. It's becoming so genuinely happy that revenge becomes irrelevant. Sophie had stolen my fiancé 5 years ago. In doing so, she'd given me something far more valuable than a marriage built on shallow attraction and social status. She'd given me the chance to discover that I was strong enough to build my own happiness from nothing at all. And that, I thought, as Alexander's arms tightened around me, was the most beautiful victory of all.